Hi, I'm George Pearson, and in this Photoshop Elements Effects video, we'll be taking this jar right here and this background here and adding the jar to the background just like that using a transparency technique. Now if you enjoyed this video, make sure you click that like button and of course share and also subscribe, and take a look at my complete training courses for Photoshop Elements, and there's a link right down there in the description. Okay, let's get to it. For this Photoshop Elements Effects Transparency project, we'll be using this jar here. As you can see here, it's on a white background, so there's white in there. And also there's this reflection down here, colored reflection at the bottom. We'll just forget about the lid. We don't need the lid. So we'll be using this. And then, of course, here is the background image. Now, if you want to follow along with this project, you'll find a link right down there in the description where you can download both of these two files, the transparency jar and this background image. Also, to make this real easy, I'm going to be setting this up as floating windows, and just go up to Edit, come down to Preferences and General, and make sure these two check boxes on that first tab there are selected. Allow floating documents and also enable floating document window docking. With those two checked, you can do this nice trick. Just grab the tab up here, pull it down. This is now floating, which makes it real easy to grab that background layer and drag it into the other file. There we go. That easy to put these two images together. If you want to resize or position your image, now is the time to do it. Just bring the opacity down a little bit so you can kind of see through, and you can then position this where you want to. Oh, let's put the jar right in there. I think that's a pretty good spot right there. Okay, so that is now positioned in the image. Okay, now at this point, this is pretty washed out. It's a pretty dull scene. It's real low contrast. Let's beef the contrast up a little bit. We need to have contrast to make the transparency really work out well. And if we have a really contrasty jar in front and then a low contrast background, it's not going to look like it matches. So let's first bring up some contrast in here. And we'll do that with a layer up here. Come down to New Adjustment Layer and Levels. And here it says Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask. I always have that checked. And that just limits this effect to that one layer. At this point it really doesn't matter, but I do this just out of habit anyway. It's good to have that habit because this will be important on other layers. Okay, left hand side, this controls the blacks right there. Right hand side controls your whites, and the middle controls your mid-tone values. Notice how all the values in this image are really kind of scrunched together in here. They're not going the full range, so it's limited in its contrasts. So we need to bring our blacks in and our whites in a little bit, and maybe a little bit of adjustment in here in the mid values. Let's first bring the blacks in. What you want to bring them in pretty close here to the where the blacks are shown in that histogram. And that's right there, and then up just a little bit more. And maybe right about here. You can see I'm just inside this one big peak right there. That's the strongest number of blacks in the image, is that peak. So I brought this in just inside of that peak. On the light side, on the whites, let's bring this in a little bit. And again, I'm bringing it in right into where that peak is. That's where the most whites are in the image. So we've brought that one in. If we take this mid control and move this to the right just a little bit, we can kind of ease out those values a touch in there. See, going lighter, it gets a bit washed out, and just a touch in here on the right hand side. I think that helps. Maybe about there. And that should be pretty good. There's lots of contrast now showing in here. It's a bit darker in some spots. We've kept the whites light in the background. We darkened the darks down. And this should work out well with the contrast of the jar. You can always come back to these. Just close this one down like that. You can always come back to the adjustment layers. This is why I like using these adjustment layers in here when possible, instead of using the stuff over here in the Enhance section, because you can always come back and make adjustments later. Just double click on that thumbnail right here, and you can then readjust to match your image. It gives you much more freedom of control as you're working on your project. Okay, let's go back up here to the jar layer. We'll show that again, and I'll put the opacity back up to 100. Now we'll be doing two parts on this. The first part we'll do here is to mask out and use the reflections down here and put those into the image, and we'll then do the jar as a second step. So for this, let's just zoom in a bit. I'll grab the zoom tool up here and we'll zoom in nice and tight, little scroll wheel right there. That's pretty good. And grab the polygonal lasso tool, my personal favorite tool. All we need to do is to make a nice, careful selection along the base of the jar in here, and then come way outside around the bottom. I'll just begin this, and then, since I don't want to have you just sitting there watching me do these little dots this whole time, I'll go ahead and pause the video. I'll finish making this selection, and then we'll bring it right back up again. Okay, there it is, just a careful selection around the bottom right there of the jar, and then outside around the rest of that reflection. Once you have this selection made, we can make this into a layer mask. Just click the layer mask button right there. That hides the jar and just shows this stuff down here. Now we need to blend this into the table in the background. So we'll be using a blend mode for that. Go up here to our modes, and the one you want right here is the linear burn. It's a transparent, and you can kind of see the stuff through there. Let me just show and hide this. You can see there it is. It's pretty obvious once I show it and hide it, but it could be a lot richer than this. We can fix that by just taking this layer here and making a duplicate of it, and there we go. Now we're beginning to see some of that stuff in there. Okay, so there it is. That puts in those little bit of reflections. It's a small touch, a small detail, but it adds a lot to the image. Let's now take this layer here and drag this up to the new layer button. Makes another copy of that. Now on this one we want to do a new layer mask. I'll click on the layer mask side over here, right click and delete the layer mask, and I'll set the burn here back to normal again. So there's our regular layer. Let's just go ahead and go up. This time same thing. I'll be using the polygonal lasso tool and make sure it's set at the new selection right down there. I normally have mine with a feathering of 1 pixel. And again, I'll just make a little selection, careful selection right around the jar. This time I'll go clear around the jar like that, and then down around this side, and then back around to the beginning. Okay, I'll pause the video. I'll make that selection around the jar, and then bring the video right back up again. And there we go. There's the selection, just carefully made right around the jar. Now that that's done, go back up again to the new layer mask button, click on that. There's our layer mask, and there's just that jar sitting in the picture. You can see there's that reflection and coloration down below, light coming through the jar. Okay, now we need to take the jar and of course blend it into the background. We're back to our blend modes again on this one. So go up to the blend mode up here, and again come down to the linear burn, and that gives us a nice basic transparent jar. Now it's not perfect. We're missing some stuff right down below here. As you can see, we're missing kind of a solid feel to the jar. We're only getting just the darker parts of that. So we need to fix that. We can do that by doing a copy of this, a duplicate of this. Just take this, drag it up here to a new layer, makes a copy. That of course richens things down, but it's not exactly the effect that I want. We want to get a bit of a softness in here. So we'll change the blend mode on this one. Go up to the blend modes, come down to pin light this time, and that gives you kind of this whiteness in here. There's a little bit of transparency showing through there, not much, but we have that nice white effect. Now we can blend this into this by changing the opacity, and as I bring this down, we begin to see that transparency again, but it's leaving us with just a little bit of a milkiness in there on the jar, and that helps make it look like there's some structure, some substance to that glass in there. Now it's pretty low on the opacity. You don't need much, maybe 19 or 20%, real low, but just enough so you have a bit of a sense of some solidness to this object, some density to the object, and that then blends that in. Now at this point it's not perfect, and we can adjust that by adjusting our values. Let me first just set this back to foot on screen. There we go, you can see it better now. Looking pretty good, but a little bit of a value adjustment is not going to hurt on this one. So let's come down to the lower of our jar layers. That's that one back in the background right there. There's that top layer, you can see that. So there's our main transparency layer. We'll put an adjustment layer on this. So layer, new adjustment layer, and levels. And again, make sure you check that checkbox right there, choose OK. And now we'll come in and just do a little bit of an adjustment. The blacks are okay. I'll leave the blacks where they are. They're pretty dark already in here. What I want to do is to darken down the overall image a bit. And we'll bring it down to about 0.5, about halfway down. We can show or hide that in here. There it is. So that just richens up the dark parts, and that helps to blend the whole thing together. And again, this is on the lower of those two levels. Let's just go ahead and close that one down. Let's now go up here to the top one and a little adjustment up here. Same trick. Layer, new adjustment layer, levels, and again, make sure that checkbox is checked. Use previous layer to create clipping mask, and again, what that does is it limits this adjustment to just that one layer right underneath of us. We're using two different adjustments in here for these two different layers, giving us just a slightly different effect. Now on this one, as you recall, it was pretty milky in here, pretty lightweight, so we can darken the darks down a bit on that. And it's a real subtle effect. We'll go ahead and we'll bring our darks down to about 30 or so. That's pretty close. And then we'll, again, just a little adjustment. You can see that if I go real far, you can see that adjustment happening in there. So just a little bit of an adjustment. I'll take it down to about 60 or so. About 0.65, 0.64 right in there. And we'll leave the whites again as they are and then close that down. So here's that adjustment. You can see it's real subtle, but it just makes it look a little bit more transparent in there with that adjustment on. And the background, we added in some more richness to our darks in there. And it's pretty close. The last little thing, I probably thinned down this dark line. It's getting a bit too dark right in there. Maybe a bit too dark right in here. Maybe back in here, it's just a bit too dark with all these adjustments. We can quickly take care of that. Let's go to our bottom layer right here. And then go over here. These are your dodge and burn tools. Dodge takes away exposure, makes things that are dark lighter, and burn will make them darker. We want the dodge. We want to stick with the shadows in here. And that's a pretty good brush size. You can see it up there on the book. That's 35 pixels right now. Exposure of 50%, so it's not going real hard, real fast. And then just brush right over this just a few times. And it's going to soften up and lighten up that dark. You begin to see it lightening up right there. Okay, just kind of knocks down that excess darkness. Do the same thing right down here a little bit. Just until you begin to see it go a little lighter. And the same thing back in here. Just taking away a little bit of the exposure in there. And it begins to go a little bit lighter. It looks a bit more natural. Right there, begin to see through. And there we go. So that's it. Making a nice transparent jar in here right on top of this background image. And again, it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. Simply working with your blend modes and a little bit of adjustments in here on your adjustment layers. And again, one of the main tricks, of course, is to do the reflection down here. Do that separately from the jar because they'll have different settings. There it is. That's doing a Photoshop Elements Effects transparency trick. Now, don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you click that like button. That really helps my channel. Also, share with your friends. Just click on share and share through social media. If you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe as well. I'll be putting up videos every single week. So you don't miss any videos, make sure you have subscribed to my channel. And take a look at my complete training course for Photoshop Elements. That's really the best way to learn how to use the program. In there I talk all about how to use all the tools, all the panels, everything. And then you'll be an expert in Photoshop Elements in no time with that training.